They need to have extreme clarity around where are we going, why, who are we going after.
It needs to be super deliberate very early on in the company and wide enough range for you to grow into it, because pivoting later on is really, really difficult, especially if you're in a weakened position.
There's so many times where I've come in as a consultant and I'll ask, hey, what you want to build and why? And if you asked every single person in that company, they would have a different answer. And I think that that is fundamentally foundational to a successful company as a whole.
Because the underlying LLMs and technologies, and to your point, even the agentic automations are accelerating so rapidly, they're not be able to deliver fully on what the promise is today.
A lot of the time, I will do a survey that's like, hey, everyone, hey, salespeople, hey, marketing
What does
people.
our company do?
What's our company? What's the problem we're solving? Who we're solving it for? And then that's very clear evidence now that a founder's not going to see on a day-to-day basis sometimes.
Bring the data.
Yeah, bring the data and say, here is what your employees or what this company is focused around. How are we supposed to get a message out there into the world, into the audience you want, etc., if we're not even clear on that?
In my opinion, wasn't deliberate enough when they first started. They were too narrow in their company narrative. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Valley. We took a little bit of a hiatus. If you can probably tell, I sound extra manly. It's been the season of germs and coughing and RSV and all the fun things in this house. So as I was telling Madison, the lesson in all of this, never have kids if you ever want to retain your health ever again.
You've really gone through
the ringer. What's going on, Madison? I haven't talked to you in a while. How's life? Anything new?
Nothing too new. I would say I'm still doing a lot of the same hobby activities that I've talked to you in the past about doing before. But I think right now I'm just really interested in keeping up with AI. I'm a bit of a YouTube rabbit holer. I don't know if that's a technical term, but I'm going to coin it. And so I, like a geek that I am, will spend a very long time, whether I'm walking, driving, just sitting, eating, whatever it is, listening to the latest AI stuff. I really like the things that Anthropic is putting out, the research that they're doing. So that's really the only new thing, I guess, that I'm
Catch me up to speed. I haven't been watching Anthropic's content. What are they talking about?
Well, the most fascinating was, I think they put this out a couple of weeks ago. They were internally having debates about how consciously aware that the AI model is now. And I think one of the guys was saying one person put their bet at 1% likelihood, another person put their bet at 15% likelihood. So it's just a really interesting perspective on the consciousness of AI and it being thinking and doing things outside of the prompt on its own. And it's just, it's really fascinating.
How are they defining consciousness?
That's a good question. I don't know the specifics, but it was just a fascinating conversation to listen to, kind of the research that goes into it. And one of the interesting tests that they ran was, and I don't know the exact specifics, I'm generalizing here, but essentially they were going to give tasks and ask questions to the AI. And what they found was the AI actually knew that it was a test and would give answers it thought that the test moderator wanted to hear versus it held back some responses that maybe it thought the moderator did not want to hear. And so it was actually similar to a human, kind of navigating the relationship dynamics, I guess, and giving a response based on that rather than anything kind of more objective and neutral as we typically think of computers.
Almost like the Turing test from back in the day, what is a computer, and then how do you actually, to your point, define computation without humans. Something I've been thinking about, and depending on when you watch this may have all changed, is you've probably seen all the updates about AI, the IRS laying off a bunch of agents, physical people agents. It's bought a Doge, and it's all the things, just because obviously, we're trying to cut costs and find efficiencies and of course solve the national deficit, which is all very good things, irrespective of your political beliefs. But what I've heard is Palantir is in there and basically using a ton of, to your point, algorithms, AI agents to then pool across different government departments to then do use AI to do auditing on behalf of the IRS, right? So in the past, it was a human being who probably went to, I don't know, all these different Department of Labor, I'm assuming your Social Security, whatever else you've gotten revenue from, right? And looking and manually checking, or maybe there's some, I know there are some computer checks and balances, but my point is it was probably much more human-led. Now, potentially whether it be with Palantir or whoever, it's AI double checking. And to your point, I'm curious where that line stops between, okay, yep, this is actually factually 1 or 0 versus we're hallucinating. And so my point is, does the AI actually, who's making the rule book? If the AI is making the rule book and it hallucinates in that, then obviously all the checks and balances are off already, right? But anyway, so I am curious, given how fast things are moving, and some people say it's slowing down, to your point, the acceleration of work, is it really accelerated, or is it just creating net new problems, kind of like social media did when we first came out, that we're now seeing that we haven't even anticipated yet?
Yeah, I mean the likely answer is like yes, because that's just kind of the nature of things. But I do think it's really fascinating, the idea of like the foundational training that AI gets, and like biases, and because it's trained on available data, and I think many people would say that data is hugely biased, because that is kind of the nature of being human. In a way, you have your different perspectives and things, and it's not about anything other than the, I keep coming back to the word bias, because I don't think there's another word for it. I mean, there's really horrible words for it if you go in far other direction, but like everyone, every single day, every single topic has biases. Scientific community is constantly trying to prove and disprove hypothesis and thesis all of the time. And so if we're training on data that is biased or maybe incomplete, doesn't give a complete picture of things, it does kind of keep me up at night sometimes to go, oh boy, what is AI going to look like in a couple of years when we've really surpassed, the milestones of even agentic AI and moving.
And I wonder how humans are going to make decisions in that new world, right? Because I don't think there is a world where obviously humans' decision making is not valued at the end of the day. You can argue what that implication on the workforce is, et cetera, but there is something around human judgment. There is something around human reasoning, and as well as context and experience. In a world where, to your point, the AI starting to then commoditize, learn on biased data, whatever, kind of leads to our topic today of how do you differentiate? How do you drive brand? How do you drive narrative, especially in B2B SaaS, even potentially in B2C, taking a playbook out of that to drive growth and to drive differentiation? It's funny, product marketing probably has really accelerated in the last 5 to 7 years. We've talked about this, just given the commoditization of feature development, and that should only accelerate with the cursors and the lovables and all the AI development assistants, co-pilots, whatever language you want to use, out there in terms of driving and building feature differentiation quickly.
Yeah, I think it's probably more true now than ever before. I mean, you hear people and product marketers in particular talk about like, oh, revisiting your narrative, right? Adapting it in the market, and, making sure that it's really relevant. But I think now probably more than ever, it's true. And I would even possibly argue that the timeline is actually shorter, right? Because like in the world where, if I flash back to like, I think it was 2023 when ChatGPT came out, big in a big way. And we had no idea that we'd be at, agentic like AI today, just kind of taking off. I know that was kind of the prediction, but like no one could really fathom or wrap their head around like what that means. And that's only 2 years away. And then the milestones that we have hit in that time period, every company, everyone in B2B SaaS, but even beyond B2B SaaS, is trying to figure out how to implement AI in their day-to-day life to make it better, make things faster, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just a B2B SaaS problem, but even I think company narrative and B2B SaaS is, kind of really more important than a lot of other areas. And so it's going to shorten the amount of time you need to go back and revisit that and really make sure that you're keeping up with the market trends that are happening, and you're speaking to how you are staking a position in all of that.
It's interesting that you mentioned every company is trying to figure out an AI strategy. I've actually heard a lot of feedback recently, and I'm curious if you've heard similar of just like slow rolling AI, obviously at the enterprise global 500 or 5,000, let's use that language, level because of the potential, compliance and regulatory implications. But even if you move down funnel, right, there's obviously a lot of interest. There's a lot of questions being asked. I'm going to use a language science experiments being conducted. However, I do see a lot of slow rolling with like true AI creation. Are you seeing that as well?
I think I think it really depends on the size of the company. I think you're spot on with like the enterprises have a lot more to lose than gain. I feel like in the early days of AI, because of all of the legal ramifications, because of all of the security ramifications, like there's so many things to consider with a large enterprise business.
Yeah.
Or even if you're a startup, but the majority of your clients are large enterprise, Fortune 500 companies, then by association, you kind of have to apply to those same or similar legal and security kind of protocols. But I definitely I advise for a lot of early stage startups right now, and I would not say that they are at all hesitant to go after AI to try to find ways to implement it, not only in kind of the operational aspect of their business, but also in the selling aspect of their business, and
So
also
what are
in
they actually
the
using? Like, are
coding.
they using AI agents for SDR? Are they using it more like Make? So for like automations, are they, what exactly, where, or do you think, is it customer service? Which seems like an easy one. Where are the first, let's call it entry points for truly automating and leveraging agentic AI, even in the small companies?
Yeah, I would say Make and Zapier are kind of the like baby steps towards that because it's the automation side. I think they're working on some AI things, but in general, people are trying to figure out how to actually incorporate AI and agentic AI in particular. Some LLM chatbot stuff, but I would say everyone's kind of in the agentic AI space right now and figuring out how they can completely pivot their business to be focused on agentic AI. So like I'll give you an example. I'll have to stay kind of high level because I don't want to give away any secret details here, but I was just having a conversation with a founder yesterday, and they were, in previous advising sessions, we were gearing towards this one particular niche in this market that was going to work really, really well. And then over the course of, chatting and kind of seeing the market and seeing the opportunity there, we kind of both went, I think that as much as this is a viable business option, it probably is going to be dead in a few years. And so like pivoting towards how can we completely rearrange how we're thinking about this product and this service and this business, incorporating agentic AI into it and doing things for you. I wish I can give more details, but that's kind of all I can high level say without giving away too much. So I think it's more about, yes, the operational side. I know many founders who are using Cursor for all of their code needs in totality. I know I have some friends in the like animation space, and they're talking about how they can use AI to basically train an AI model based on the character. You'd give them one smiling, one sad, whatever. And then you can create these really elaborate storyboards. And then even the way that Runway is going, you could possibly turn those storyboards into full-fledged animation. So those are kind of the ways that I'm seeing today a lot of the AI being incorporated. But I would say from a B2B perspective, it's mainly how do I pivot my entire business, at least at the startup level? How do I pivot my entire business to be focused and centered around AI rather than AI being a kind of nice to have inside of the actual product itself, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I guess my hot take and point of view on this is like in the startup space, especially, all these AI companies are overpromising today. What I mean by that is they have a vision. They certainly are working there, but because the underlying LLMs and technologies, and to your point, even the agentic automations are accelerating so rapidly, they're not be able to deliver fully on what the promise is today. And so narrative driven growth is going to be more important than ever, especially in a world, to your point, where the lovables and the cursors are actually helping you write code and AKA solving the problem in a similar way, right? So if we're going into a world where the narrative, the religion, what you believe to be true in this space, in this market, is going to be more paramount than ever, you know, how do founders carve out a space, not just founders, how do executives carve out a space to really plant their flag and say, this is what I believe the future can and should be, and we're working in that direction. We may not have everything today, but stay with us on this journey and we'll be able to deliver to that. Obviously, companies have been doing that since the beginning of time, even from the first ads, right, with brand promises from Coca-Cola, BMW, Nike, etc. However, I think more than ever, because there's so much hype, there's so much commotion, there's so much confusion, people are looking for direction in terms of, I see, what do you uniquely believe to be true that will be possible with the technology that will be accelerating rapidly over the next few years that you're looking to transform. So I would argue that's why vertical SaaS is taking off right now. So for example, if you are creating software for trade schools, if you are creating software for pick and packs, effectively these are like shipping warehouses, if you are creating plumbing software, right, to literally help connect a network of plumbers across the nation to run their business and their back office more operationally correct, narrative led growth, I would argue, even outside of vertical SaaS, but even within vertical SaaS, that storytelling is more important than ever, because it's truly the quote unquote digital transformation that we kind of went through in 2015 to 2020, but with the promise of truly not only mobile, local, but to your point, agentic. And so now is the time for companies to be investing in narrative, to be investing in vision. And what that means is speaking proudly and like I said, planting their point of view of, this is what I believe the future will look like with warehousing, right? We won't have, we're going to reduce the humans by 80%. It's going to be all streamlined. All the orders are going to come in, basically what Amazon has been able to do at their obviously global warehouses, we're now going to be able to do with these mom and pop warehouses with free trade zone locations and with everything geocached. I'm using that as an example, but my point is that's actually something I'm seeing in the commoditization of the AI, of just why companies should even be, starting down that path of really defining narrative market fit, for lack of a better term, and owning that, and then investing in the marketing and the PR and the, let's call it, organic groundswell around that. I'm curious what you've seen and kind of how you've thought about that with some of the clients you've been working with, and just what's going on in the market in general.
It's an interesting take. I think it's certainly, I think there's a middle ground on this that is very interesting, because narrative, I think, sometimes gets a bad rap. And what I mean by that is, like, it sort of feels like you're selling empty promises sometimes. And I think in this world, especially like the post-COVID world, I would say people, and this makes sense because PLG really took off, I would say, kind of like after that time. When there's so much competition in the market, it makes it really hard to actually stand out. And I think that one of the things that I've learned is, like, people can kind of say the same thing, but then it doesn't deliver quite like the message or the story that they're saying. And so I think that it's a tough balance, because I believe wholeheartedly in narrative. I think it's important. And I think, to your point, like, making sure that you're going out with that message proactively, painting the story of, like, this new world and this vision and how you're at the forefront of all of that. Like, I definitely, it's 100% valuable, but it does also at the same time, I think, kind of really depend on the size of the company. Like, I probably wouldn't recommend an early stage startup to invest a ton in the PR and the messaging kind of side of things, because I don't think it has a immediate return. It's a longer tail kind of return. If you are someone who is positioning yourself as an innovator or leader in a certain market, that has a longer tail to it when you kind of see those that brand recognition. So it's one of those things where, yes, I do think it's important. I think it's especially important for the sales cycle. I would say it depends, my personal experience, it depends on the size of the company as to whether they should invest in putting that message out proactively through, PR and various other things. I think you certainly can write blogs about it, but I in this new age of AI being the search agent, I don't know how that's going to go. I don't have an answer. Maybe writing blogs about, certain things is still going to be relevant. Maybe it's not. I truly don't know right now. But that's kind of the place I view it, is like it's important. And depending on the stage of company is where you invest the time to like make that messaging roll out. Does that make sense?
Interesting. I completely disagree with that. I actually think the most important thing for a startup founder in that early stage, and again, it's not to be a founder, it can be the executive team, to be 100% aligned on is what do they uniquely believe to be true about the market, about the industry, etc. And then how their solution, their point of view is going to help better that. And I think when you're young and you are obviously, still building, still trying to find product market fit, still trying to get a Rolodex of customers, feature differentiator is going to be hard, right? I'm not saying that you can't do it. I just think that people will give you grace. Companies will give you grace. Prospects will give you grace if you don't have 100% today of a Workday, of a Salesforce, of a Market, of an Adobe, whatever, right? From a feature perspective. But what they will buy into is why your narrative, your point of view is different than how the problem is solved today. And they will be a partner with you on that journey to figure it out. Obviously, there's going to be a minimum, let's call it, threshold of features where it has to actually work, right? And you can't just, to your point, show up with vaporware. We've seen in the WeWorks of the world where that doesn't happen. And that doesn't work out well. But I think where startups fail is they lead with product, or they try to lead with this, product market fit and just leading with features and, oh, what do you want? I'll build it for you. And I'm not saying there isn't a place for that. I actually think people will give you grace and invest with you on this journey if you say, hey, the way the current world is wrong, here's why, or it's outdated, or it doesn't serve in this, to your point, AI agentic world. Here's how we're approaching it uniquely. Today, we're just tackling this part of the problem, and over time, we're going to solve more and more and more of that. And because we're small, we're nimble, whatever, we're going to build with you. Obviously, if you're larger, you're a scale up, you can tell more of that story, right? You can see our track record of how we've attacked this problem bit by bit by bit. We've already built this and we're continuing to move here. Obviously, if you're even larger, you have a unique point of view. But my point is, I actually think it's the most underrated, underinvested. And to your point, I don't think it's the traditional PR campaign, right? Press releases are dead. I don't think it's let's get in front of a reporter, launch events. We've talked about this, launch waves versus a pure event. But going out organically, having a point of view is how you get organic coverage from reporters, from, interesting things to say at industry events, interesting things to say with analysts, etc. It's having that point of view that is differentiated. Hot takes, right? Again, it doesn't have to be different for the sake of being different. I think that's the key. It's just more about, if warehouses have been done this way forever, and in this new world of tariffs and technology and mobile phones and whatever, here's a new way it can be done. I'm using that as a high level example, but my TLDR is narrative driven growth, in my opinion, is actually the future. It's not even like, you're already seeing it. Go turn on anyone's LinkedIn and it's just a bunch of bombastic people building in public, aka driving a narrative of what they're solving and bringing you along and encouraging you to try to be a partner on that journey.
So that's interesting. Okay, so I want to dig in there, because I definitely agree with the sentiment of like founders on LinkedIn posting, frequently about the problem that they're solving. So I definitely think that is like important and foundational. I think there's a lot of guerrilla marketing techniques that you can do, growth marketing techniques that you can do around that. I think maybe it would be important to distinguish between like the I don't have a terminology for this, grounded versus futuristic. I'm coming up with this on the fly, narrative. Because I think like when I think of narrative, I think of like, where are we going? How are we going to make the market different? It's very futuristic oriented Investors love it when you're talking to executives. They also love it because they want to feel like they're kind of on this, not rocket ship, but they are innovators. They are, delivering the best thing for the company that they're working at. They are part of some, very elite future focused group. That resonates really well. I wouldn't say that it resonates really well with the general market. General market really
But narrative
wants.
doesn't have to be about like a point of view in the future. Narrative could literally start with what's broken today and why there needs to be a change, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, if you see a lot of what, to your point, and we're just using founders on LinkedIn as an example, but I would
Right.
argue, a lot of these people that are speaking at conferences, a lot of these people that are getting the airtime on the tech crunches and et cetera, they're saying, hey, I believe insurance, the way insurance is done today is broken, right? Like, it's really old school. You go, and talk to a bunch of, whether it be in-person vendors or you go to these Policy Genius type sites, no offense to, or Zebra, and you sell your data. I
Yeah.
think there's a better way to auto match you in real time without having to wait, 30 minutes to 30 days, 3 days for people to come back. So I think I disagree there. Like, you don't have to plant your flag in terms of like, here's exactly the answer of the rocket ship. So let's use Adam Newman, probably one of the best narrative folks ever. And like I said earlier, obviously, with just vaporware, he had other issues, but everyone from Masa down has said he's one of the like best storytellers. And what did, his big thing was just millennials don't want to work in the stodgy offices that baby boomers, right, and the old school, with all due respect, workforce wanted to. They want something community oriented, people oriented, right? That's around food. Anyway, so my point is, narrative could just also be around talking about there's a different way, like why category, why company, why now, right?
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I think it's almost the separation between brand narrative and product narrative, because I think, to your point, like from the very beginning, before you probably even have a working product, you maybe have a prototype, you maybe don't, you should have an idea of what is the problem that we're solving, who are we solving it for, like all those foundational things. Yes, I agree with you that I bucket that under like product positioning, product narrative. And then there's sort of like the brand story part of things, which is like the brand story framework of like the customer is the hero. And then that's where you really like frame your sales narrative, I think, around that conversation, which I think is important. And then there's sort of like the futuristic, when Microsoft gets up and does a keynote, like they're talking about how they are the leaders of the market. They're really setting the tone. They're going to market with the fact that they are leaders, and here's why, and here's all the things that they are doing. So I see it as kind of like those parts. So I do agree with you that like from day zero, like you should have an idea of like what that product narrative is. And for early stage founders, to your point on LinkedIn, should be reiterating that story centered around sort of these more foundational things, like the problem that we're solving, who we're solving it for, why we're different, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I distinguish them in my mind, but maybe what's your perspective? Like, do you actually distinguish brand versus product narrative, or is it the same to you, or like how do you view all the pieces of a company
I was
narrative?
going to ask you, what do you see the differences between product narrative and brand narrative?
Yeah, I think brand narrative is more about the feeling that you give people. This is overly simplistic, but brand narrative is more the feeling that you give people. The product narrative is more about the like practicalities. What is the problem that you're solving? How do you solve that? Why are you solving it? How are you different? Those types of things are very product oriented for me, versus brand is sort of like the feeling components. Like, how do we make you feel like the best person at your job?
Give me an example of someone who you think has done a good job with brand narrative, and give me an example of someone who's done a good job company with product narrative.
I think Apple for brand narrative.
And what is the brand narrative that you think that they give?
I think that Steve Jobs did a really great tackled the brand story in a way where he didn't really talk about the product. He talked about the vision. I wish I had a direct quote. I'm just thinking of like
1,000 songs in your pocket.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just thinking of all the Steve Jobs many YouTube videos I've watched in the past. But his whole thesis was sort of like, don't talk about the product. Now, to be fair, he was very innovative in what he did with the product. And there was a time and place, like, before that you had sort of like having an interface that you could just like drag your mouse around. I know it's like we take it for granted now, but like that wasn't a thing. You had to like tell the computer exactly where you wanted to go. So he was innovative from a product perspective. And there was certainly a piece of that he spoke to about the problem that he's solving, about, you know, the features and functionality and how it makes your life different and why you're really going to benefit from the product. But the majority of the work that he did was around creating this brand story, how you're going to feel, how the future of innovation in the computer landscape is going to be. He did a really great job, I think, of painting that futuristic viewpoint.
Got it. That's interesting. Let's put a pin in that. And then who do you think has done a fantastic job in product narrative? Out of curiosity.
That's a good question. Recent example?
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Okay. I would probably say, I'm going to use a recent example just because they're top of mind. I was on LinkedIn earlier today and I saw them pop up. Hockey Stack has done a really great job, I think, of cutting into the attribution market. And genuinely, this is actually a really great example. If you asked me what their brand story was, I could not tell you, but I know what their product story is. And their product story is basically attribution is broken. We're fixing it and doing kind of like this mixed media modeling and kind of there's more of like this proprietary system included. But I think that they've done a really great job on LinkedIn in particular, doing these bite-sized stories and talking about like why they're doing what they're doing from a product perspective to make attribution as a whole different in the space.
That's so interesting because I'm glad I asked for examples because I kind of see brand and product narrative as one and the same. And so let's break down those examples that we just brought up. So like when I think about Apple, at the end of the day, there's just one company narrative, right? And it's like design matters. I'm oversimplifying it, but to your point, like previously UI, UX design was almost an afterthought with obviously Microsoft being the big gorilla in the room. Yeah. And to your point, Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive and that whole crew, Wozniak obviously really brought in this belief in this religion, for lack of a better term, that you deserve something that's well designed and easy to use. And all of our products, whether it be a laptop, whether it be a desktop, whether it be an iPhone, whether it be an iPad, et cetera, are well designed, right? And that's call it like company narrative. That's a thread through all their products. Hockey Stack, to your point, it's interesting. I've seen some of their content in terms of breaking through the noise on LinkedIn, and it's they've invested a lot in top of the funnel content marketing, like high production videos and stuff like that around the feeling of a CRO being in the oh shit seat, having to do forecasting, having to do, to your point, attribution, with the CEO breathing down the neck, right? I think the most recent video, which is I'm sure outdated now, I saw was like their CRO going to Blue Bottle and hanging out, right before a board meeting because all the, to your point, reporting and attribution was done already. So my point is more, and I actually don't think the brand narrative and the product narrative are that divorced. And obviously we can keep going, and we should probably have different examples. I actually think when it's done right, it's actually congruent. And when it's done incorrectly and they're very divorced, that's where you have cognitive dissonance on the buyer side. And big companies are very, very guilty of this. Why? Because there's like, picking on Microsoft, the Microsoft big brand. And then there's all these like, Windows, Azure, right? Laptops, gaming, GitHub, et cetera. And they'll obviously have, more product or sub-brand, whatever language you want to use. But like a Hockey Stack, when they're, at that size, they have amazing control over company narrative. And going back to the feeling, if we use that language, I think they're trying to connote is, hey, if you companies that use Hockey Stack, they can not be super stressed out about reporting and attribution because it's all already done for them, right? And they're literally grabbing bougie ass coffee right before their board meeting. But I'm curious, like, where have you seen? Maybe you see that differently in your customers, in your clients, or just across the market.
Yeah, well, I want to double tap on one thing really quick because I want to make sure I'm understanding. When you say cognitive, like the customer having cognitive dissonance, like what are you seeing with that? What do you mean by that? Because I think
great example, right? Yeah. So Adobe. Historically, Adobe has been a design focused. Literally, they build for designers, right?
Right.
InDesign and all their tools, right? I mean, they literally try to buy Figma, which obviously didn't get through. I think they have then over the years tried to buy tools that go beyond core designer. So like they bought Magento, they bought Marketo, they bought a few other things. And I'm not, by the way, poo-pooing on their brand. Obviously, they're a very successful company. But my point is their core base is a design focused person. Their brand promise is we believe in the power of design. We don't literally, Adobe does not do any agency work. All of their design, all of their production, all of their videos are done in-house. Like they practice what they preach in that perspective. But yet over time, obviously because they're trying to grow market share, they're trying to grow revenue, they're trying to create return for their investors, they've had to go invest in new adjacencies that are outside of core design, right? So yes, they still have these core conferences like Adobe Max and stuff like that that are very much focused to the designer, specifically persona. But over time, they've tried to go up in the org by, when I say up, like the CMO, by getting these adjacent, the MOPS person, right? The demand gen person trying to get more into B2B, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where I think over time the brand narrative is evolved. And Adobe's a multi-billion-dollar company. It's been around for a long time. I think they have permission. They have earned the right to then evolve that story. My point is I see startups often. When I say startups, I mean up to series, E and F, trying to expand their core. We've talked about like a wedge strategy, for lack of a better term, their core persona, where it becomes either they started with too narrow of a company narrative, and so they outgrew it, for lack of a better term, or they never had one and it was just haphazardly put together by the market.
Yeah.
Or, like I was saying, it's just been confusing because over time they've just tried to expand into different markets and people are just like, whoa, what's happening, right?
Yeah.
A good example is ZoomInfo. Recently, they literally changed their NASDAQ, like lettering from ZI to GTM, because now they're trying to change their brand narrative or their company narrative. Let's use that language, right? The company narrative is never like, it's no longer just we're data appendant software, and everyone knows ZoomInfo obviously has had some struggles recently, but they're trying to expand to GTM. We're not just sales, we're for CS, we're for marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an example where, in my opinion, ZoomInfo wasn't deliberate enough when they first started. They were too narrow in their company narrative. We're for sales, we're doing data appendment. It's a very, very commoditized space, and obvious, but to some extent, the market has moved beyond them. There's other issues too, and we won't solve it all right now. But now it's too narrow. So now they're in this situation where their stock is down 50-60%, and they're trying to expand that company narrative. And I think that's really, really, really difficult because you're coming from a very defensive place versus being proactive from the very beginning, when you're literally starting, saying this is what we believe, this is why it's currently broken, and here's a wide enough umbrella. Design matters. It wasn't computers are broken, or the internet is not whatever, right? It was like design's broken, right? Technology should be easy to use. Okay, that's a huge umbrella for them to go build the right the right tools and the right products. And then, I get there's nuances, B2B, B2C, hardware, software. We're kind of mixing all the different things here, but I think my TLDR is like company narrative to me is inclusive of everything. And I think it needs to be super deliberate very early on in the company and wide enough range for you to grow into it, because pivoting later on is really, really difficult, especially if you're in a weakened position.
Yeah. One thing you said was very interesting to me, which is the niching, starting too small. Cause I think this is a big challenge with especially early stage startups. I would say anything pre-seed to maybe like Series B max, depending. I mean, I've seen Series C companies operate like Series A, so it kind of just depends on the bucket of things. But in general, like in this, I'm still figuring it out stage. I'm not in the like rinse and repeat, we found the scalable thing quite yet. And I often find that niching is the best thing that they can do, because if they try to go after everyone all at once, it gets really difficult. Now, that's from a product lens, a problem lens, a segment lens, all that kind of stuff. I'm curious, when you were saying like the company narrative maybe starts out too niche, do you view the company narrative as wider, bigger than the actual like segments or problem that you're solving or things like that? It just plays a bigger story, or like how do you view the relationship there?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to your point, I'm sure there's nuance. At the company level, especially at the stage that we're kind of talking about now, C to Series A, maybe even Series B, often the founder is still very much involved in selling, right?
Yeah.
And so when the founder is involved in selling, I find he or she to be the best person to deliver the why we exist story. And that's the brand, that's the company narrative, right? To your point, then we should be very narrow and to hear the 3 to 5. We talked about sales plays, use cases. Here's the 3 to 5 pain points specifically. Here's the 3 to 5 value, benefit, customer evidence stories that we go and deliver. But I think many times I find companies start there, especially at that stage. They start very small and narrow. Oh, you have a ops problem. Let me help you with that. No one is using Salesforce. Let me help you with that. It's like, no, that's not actually the problem that no one's using Salesforce. The actual problem in the big enough company narrative is like, we believe, like Hockey Stack, that board meetings shouldn't be a 1 week sprint of all hands on deck to get done. Like, reporting should be democratized, whatever language you want to use, right? At all times, you should have real time access to data to company performance. The way we capture that today through Salesforce is broken. Okay, we are a tool that, and this is not what Hockey Stack does, but that leverages Slack, that leverages Teams as your front door to update your revenue information at all times so that you've now democratized that across the entire company. So again, I'm picking from different companies, but my point is that's the, in my opinion, company narrative companies should start with, which is reporting is broken, attribution, versus where I often see those small companies start, which is no one uses your Salesforce. People hate your Salesforce. Your Salesforce is outdated. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. But that's that's not the actual problem. You see what I'm saying? And then let's say we're Series E now. Is our company narrative Salesforce is broken? No, right? Hopefully your company narrative is much broader.
Yeah.
Of there needs to be a new way for us to capture real-time revenue across the company.
Yeah.
Okay, here's all the tools that we built to go support that.
Yeah, for sure. It's very interesting because I feel like the nuance of early stage startups and pivoting every 20 seconds is kind of like how it feels like in the best way, by the way. That was that was not a bad thing. I think it can be really, really fun. But I think it's really interesting to think about like the narrative component of all of that, because like I was just talking with someone maybe like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, something like that, where I engaged with him to start talking about like the narrative, the problem we're solving, putting together that positioning and, you know, like kind of those foundational things. And I found that it changed so much that like the invested time, it's just a tricky thing. Cause I think it definitely, like for anyone, definitely Series B, sometimes Series A, like more that you've found initial product market fit, but you're just trying to figure out like the meat of the whole situation right before you can go scale. For those people, I think the longevity of that investment is definitely more practical. Like if I come into a Series C company and do positioning and messaging for them, the odds of that positioning and messaging or like basic product that they have changing in the next 3 to 6 months is pretty slim. Versus for an early stage startup that is like, you know, a YC type company, they've like barely got seed investment, they may pivot tomorrow. And then all of that work spent on sort of the like who we're doing, you know, what we're doing, you know, for all that kind of stuff. So it's something that I constantly struggle with for sure, because I tend to gravitate more towards those really early startup companies. When things change so frequently, it's amazing. There's so much possibility. There's like excitement, you know, there's a lot of really positive things, but the con of that is like figuring out how much time do I invest in this and say yes to it and run with it versus, you know, how much do I do just a little bit of it? I haven't quite found that rhythm yet. It's something I'm aspiring to, but it definitely is I'd say more of a complicated investment.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. If we take a huge step back and kind of start where we began around AI and the commoditization of knowledge, you have to believe that in a world where facts are commonplace and commoditized, narratives matter. So another way to say that easily is people remember stories, not facts. And so then the question is, you know, regardless of what stage you're at, how do you tell a story, a narrative of what it is that you believe and what the problem is that you are looking to solve. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of your why, right? And then from there, obviously, how you do it is through your specific sales plays or your pain points and use cases, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious from your perspective, when do you see companies starting to invest in company narrative? Do you see them doing it at the seed stage, or when have you found it to be? Because we kind of talked about when it's maybe not ideal to start widening that, right? But when is it, in your opinion, fruitful to start that investment?
That's a good question, and I think there's more behind the scenes than just an easy answer of like, you should start it here. The realities of like, consulting, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, is like half the battle, if not more than half the battle, is not actually like doing the thing. Yeah. It's more about like the managing of expectations, and then, really going head to head in a positive way with the founder or with the exec team or like whoever you're working with on why something's important to do. But I think all of that kind of being foundational, I've gone into many companies where you talk about company narrative and they're like, what do you like? Why would I spend time on that? What are you talking about? And there's a lot of pushback there. So like, certainly I think that at the larger the company, the more scale up you are, like Series C, Series D, and beyond into like, public Fortune 500 companies, I don't think you really have to convince a whole lot of people on the benefit and value of like having a cohesive narrative. And like, especially if you have departments like PR and brand, like everybody wants to be on the same page doing campaigns and having this rollout. So there's more of this investment on a personal note towards, yes, let's do company narrative. And you probably have some version of that, but really coming in and making sure that it's like really well thought out, that it's good for the marketplace today, et cetera, et cetera. So like, I would say for those stage companies, a little bit easier. For early stage companies, I typically don't push very hard on the narrative stuff from the beginning. And the only reason being is because I often find that what I call the foundational pillars of like, why we're here, what's the product, what problem are we solving, which I guess you could argue is part of narrative, but I see it as a piece of the overall narrative, not like the full narrative. So those foundational pieces, I work with the founder more so to understand and build and set as much as you can in concrete, right? And then on top of that, you can build up this story. And I think it's also really important to understand what resources a team has. So like a lot of the early stage companies that I work with, it's a team of founders. Like maybe they have one marketing person. Like it's not this like robust team ecosystem that they can really tap into, right? So I think also taking that into consideration, one of the main purposes of the narrative is to get it out into the market. If you are in a stage where you're trying to find product market fit in a very niche community, you're not trying to go out into market with a message in particular, you're trying to find product market fit with a specific sub-niche, then you're still going to have some version of a narrative. You still need to sell your product to the people that you want to buy it, test it, whatever you want to do. So messaging is important there, but I guess I view it, maybe it'd be like a ladder, right? Like if narrative building is a ladder, like they're on the first little bit of the ladder and like you need a little bit, but it's not quite as complex and well thought out as the narrative you might need for a Fortune 500 company who has these multitudes of campaigns across departments that they need to run.
I agree with that. I'm curious, from your time at ClickUp, how did you guys think about like company narrative? Is that something that you guys really led with as you like went to market? I'm just curious. I mean, I know you guys did a Super Bowl ad, so obviously a lot was turned on the brand side.
I will say they weren't really big into narrative. I remember when we finally got like a full-fledged product marketing team, and it wasn't just me, which was the best day ever. But I finally had people in my court who were kind of pushing, because it's like one thing to go head to head with it, right?
Yeah.
It's another thing to have like a fully fledged team behind you being like, no, we should really do this. And so it was a project when I first started, but then it kind of got dropped. And then, as we kind of built out this team and had more people, more voices, a bigger organization, we started to push on this idea of a narrative and like having fundamental positioning and messaging. And I wouldn't say it was something that was of the highest priority in the org as a whole. That was my real first lesson, and sort of like, it doesn't really matter what I think. I can make the case, I can make the argument, I can do all the things, but at the end of the day, I think sometimes it's about the perception of the output. And I have worked with many founders who their perceived value of narrative messaging is not seen that much. Yeah. And I think they want more output than anything else. They want to know, hey, if I go launch this ad, I'm going to get a return. And narrative messaging is very hard to have a singular return from. I think we can all agree it's a foundational piece that drives everything, but it's hard to get that like ROI very, very clear on like, we did this narrative and therefore, it's kind of this like ripple effect over time throughout the business. So
I love that we're having this conversation, because going back to where we started, I want to talk about our biases, which is like, I've worked in 2 organizations, Microsoft and Marketo, where narrative was paramount. And it's frankly why we won, right? I would argue both of those companies didn't have the best technical product whatsoever in the market.
Yeah.
But we lived on that narrative and really invested not only on the sales side, but on the entire go-to-market side. And of course, for Microsoft, the PR, the brands piece of just like the innovation, right? And et cetera, et cetera. So, and obviously from a consulting side, I've also worked with founders and exec teams that, to your point, I've had to prove the value and continue to try to prove the value of narrative over facts. And it sounds like, obviously at ClickUp and maybe some of the other places you've consulted with, it's been more of an uphill battle to convince and to rally around a narrative or a story versus a fact.
Yeah.
So I'm really, really glad that we're able to bring these different perspectives, because to your point, if it's kind of like you can't see color if someone can explain color to you, but if you haven't seen it, then you don't know what it is, right? And by the way, I'm not saying that ClickUp didn't see color, but you get where I'm going, which is like, we are all I guess influenced by things we've seen and places we've worked. And to your point, I also think the industry really matters and the buyer really matters, right? Like, obviously some of the most discerning buyers are finance, or obviously, IT, it's the CISO, et cetera. So narrative really, really matters. Being technical specs and feature, product, function really matters. But I will say, especially given with the rise of where we started, the Lovable and the co-pilots helping code, cursors, et cetera, right? Like, how do you stand out in a really, really crowded market? People call it brand, but I really just call it narrative. And because when I think of brand, we talked about this, it's like colors and fonts, which yes, are important, but it's really, what is the story that people think about when they associate with this product or this company, excuse me.
Yeah. How important do you think that cohesive messaging is a part of that brand story? Because I definitely think that I've seen, when you were talking, I was thinking through some like previous experiences where I've seen brand do really well. And I'm thinking, and I'm like, I don't think that they had a cohesive messaging between those brand moments, but because the brand was trendy, or, I don't want to give away the company that I'm thinking of, because I don't want to, throw shade in any regard, a very successful company, but like they had started to invest probably in the last year on doing more like short form content, video content, podcast content, tapping into the creator market, like really going hard on sort of more brand and awareness channels and things like that. And it really boosted a lot of things. But I can't tell you what the overall narrative and messaging of that was. So it's a very interesting perspective on sort of like, how do you make sure messaging is consistent across any brand initiative that you do? Do you have an example of that? Because I'm even thinking now, and I'm like, I don't think I have an example of one person who's done that.
It's funny now that we're talking, I'm like, man, we should have started here, which is like, what is a company narrative? So the story is probably folklore, and I may have mentioned it before. Who knows if it's actually true or not? There's a lot of stories about Elon Musk. But one of the stories about Elon Musk is that he's like, he loves to, be very hands-on and walks the floors of the factories, etc. And when you walked the floor of Tesla, there was a guy who was putting like a nut and a bolt for a tire, and he asked him, "What do you do here?" And he's like, "Well, I'm responsible for the hydraulics or whatever, and the nut and the bolt, and da da da." But ultimately to help drive clean energy so that the company, the world, I should say, goes more carbon neutral. We reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. So folklore, who knows? But my point is, I can use my example at Marketo, which was something we were very invested in, is that every single person on the go-to-market team, whether or not you were customer facing, could tell a congruent story of why we exist, why category, why Marketo, why now. And that was very deliberate in terms of the enablement, to tell them again, the reinforcement, like beating people over the head, right? And it wasn't like, here's the pitch deck, learn the 10 slides. Yeah. It was literally like, here's the why we exist. And if whether you're in an elevator, whether you're at the airport, whether you're obviously in front of a customer and your customer success, or you're a support person who's just working, these crazy hours, like you are very in the know of the mission, and I hate to use that word in Silicon Valley, but at least the problem we're trying to solve and why we believe the old world is broken, right? I personally have found that whenever the companies I consulted at, where that is an investment that is made, everything is just easier. Because when decisions are made, you don't have to keep explaining why, or how does this ladder up to our strategy, yes, or why has it changed from last year, or whatever, right? I think it's the market has changed, the competitors have changed, our mission hasn't changed, but our tactics may change, or our strategy may change. So to your point, it may feel like more of an upfront investment. Mm-hmm. However, I have seen the repercussions, and to your point, have felt when it is not invested, because then it just feels very haphazard. And it feels like, well, at the beginning of the year at SKO or at company kickoff, here was the strategy. And now we're sitting in June and we're going this other direction. And now there's a lot of disarray and confusion. I'm not saying at companies where that is, obviously Tesla has a lot of disarray and confusion, market, et cetera, but I'm saying that it at least helps to thread a needle between like where the, where we are today, where the puck is going.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always categorized it as vision. I almost wonder if like how much overlap all of this stuff is, because I totally agree with you. Like there is in any place, but especially in a scaling place, because you have more parties, more people, more.
I think at Twitter they used to call it tea time. At Facebook in the early days, call it TGIF, where to your point, it was in all hands, right? And literally it would be like Mark and Jack up there like answering these like 101 questions.
Yeah.
To your point, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's great, because I think that there's always more room for clarity, but the clarity piece throughout the organization of the North Star. Why are we doing what we're doing? Even like forget about PR, forget about everything, internal in a company. I think that's so spot on. And I'm so glad you said it, because there's so many times where I've come in as a consultant and I'll ask, hey, what you want to build and why? And if you asked every single person in that company, they would have a different answer. And I think that is fundamentally foundational to a successful company as a whole. And then once you have that, you can build on top of that. Once everyone's on the same page, you can build on top of that, sort of like, what's the brand story we're telling when we're on a sales call? How are we enabling people? What's the brand story that we're telling to PR? And what's the story we want out there in the media that we want to be attached to? What are the things? And then you kind of have these like branches in a way. I'm a visual person, so I'm thinking this literally like there are branches going out. What are the branches from there? But it is, I think, very valuable for any stage company, sure, but especially if you're starting to really build out your departments, or you have existing departments that are trying to like go to market effectively and autonomously on their own. They're not running every single thing by the CEO or the execs on the team. They need to have a very clear understanding. They need to have extreme clarity around where are we going, why, who are we going after, what are we saying to those people. Actually, I'm going to take that last one back. What are we saying to people, I think, is still the branch that can be expanded upon later. I think it's more about the foundational, who are we, what are we, where are we going, that kind of thing.
So if you're working in a company, what advice do you give to someone who's like understands the importance of company narrative, maybe has been influenced by us over the last little bit of time? How do they go and work with their executive team to say, hey, this should be a priority and somewhere we can invest. And to your point, it may not have immediate ROI, but it's absolutely foundational to everything we do.
How do I work with a founder that already knows the value?
If someone who works at a company and today their founder or their executive team hasn't been investing in the company narrative, what advice, I guess, do you give them in terms of, raising this and prioritizing this?
I actually start kind of what we just talked about, which is more of the internal dynamics, because I think that the external dynamics of company narrative, if they already thought it was important, they would have already done it. So if they're not doing it, they don't think it's important. And so I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, because how I was going to say it maybe isn't the best, but you kind of have to like inception the idea a little bit. It has to grow on them for a while, at least in my experience. So for me, I like to give tangible results because they don't have perspective. Many of the founders, I'm sure you'd probably say the same thing, many of the founders I've worked with are full-time founders from the time they graduated college. Like
the only job they've had.
It's the only job they've had. They've never been a buyer. They've never worked in a company where they had onboard software. And so there's a lack of perspective in that. And there is no, you either know you lack perspective and you trust other people, or you don't, which is totally understandable. So you need to gain that perspective. Those are the only two ways that you like do that. So I'd like to prove value inside first. So kind of what we were talking about of like, everyone has to say the same thing inside the company. Like a lot of the time I will do a survey that's like, hey, everyone, hey, salespeople, hey, marketing
what people. Does our company do?
What's our company? What's the problem we're solving? Who we're solving it for? And then that's very clear evidence now that a founder's not going to see on a day-to-day basis sometimes.
Bring the data.
Yeah, bring the data and say, here is what your employees or what this company is focused around. How are we supposed to get a message out there into the world, into the audience you want, et cetera, if we're not even clear on that? And then it becomes I would say a fun thing for a founder to do, because founders a lot of them are very visionary. They like painting the future. But I think sometimes there's an inherent problem in that, which is like, not everybody likes to think about the future, like wants to see this vision. So if you're talking to someone who their mind doesn't work that way, then all the pieces you're connecting between the dots, they're not connecting. And you have to paint a very clear picture of what exactly you're doing. Otherwise, you'll get what I call the false yes. I think it was Chris Voss who originally coined this, which is like people just say yes to like be complacent, keep their job, do the thing, right? And then you end up in this place where so many false yeses have happened, you've lost the plot entirely.
It's so great to hear you say this. And I'll end on probably on this, which is you and I probably both worked and or consulted at companies where we've seen both, to your point. The high in the sky founder who has this amazing vision, but if you go ask the team, they're like, oh, he's or she is 12 steps ahead of us. And we're not there yet. And then we have the opposite, which is we have founders who don't have vision and are so in the here and now. And to your point, change their mind on the daily because it's agile, right? And they want to adapt agility, which is not a bad thing. So to your point, right, there's always nuance, and probably the answer is somewhere in the middle. But I'm glad, like I said, we were able to kind of bring this issue out because we are, like, as I mentioned, influenced and biased from the experiences that we have had. Last question for you. When you think about company narrative in PLG, where's the connective tissue, to use your language? That's not exactly what you said, but to your point about the disconnect, right? How do you make sure that on a PLG driven growth strategy, it aligns with the umbrella company narrative so that there's no cognitive dissonance on the buyer or on the market side?
I view overall positioning, messaging, narrative, etc., as like there are layers to it. I use the ladder analogy. Maybe I'll keep that. I'm not sure, but like there are layers, and I think that the message you go to market with for someone who's going to come in at the ground floor using a free trial or whatever, that value, that story is going to be a lot different than if you're selling to like the CRO at a Fortune 500 company, even if it's the same software. So I think that like there's Sure, always a overlaying company narrative, to your point, that needs to be threaded as the same thing. So like, I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe I can use, I mean, I'm just going to use ClickUp just because that's kind of top of mind for all of this stuff, because we sold both to really large companies as well as had kind of this like freemium free trial situation. The whole differentiator of ClickUp was like the all-in-one place, right? So like you have the Asanas, you have the Jiras, you have all the things, and they do really well for those teams. No shame to them. But the problem is if you're working in an environment where you need to cross collaborate, which I mean, as a product marketer, I'm like, heck yes, I'm probably the most cross collaborator of the entire business. So 100%. For me, even I'm like, heck yes. But I think that like that was the real narrative and differentiator that we wanted to go into market with, was all under one place, all housed under one place, versus some of these other companies that were more siloed. And so as you're coming in as a ground floor person, what we found was, and this is kind of obvious, they don't really give a shit about that. Like they just want to get this job to be done. So I think that the overall narrative can be embedded in the brand stuff that you do, but at the root of that individual user coming in is you have to prove value to them individually. And then the second thing you prove value on is team. And then the third thing you provide value on is now teams in different departments. And that's where that story starts to come in about like the, you have the all-in-one place, you have the dashboards, you have the project management, you have all of those tools all in one place, but now it's all teams in one place. So then you kind of like build on top of that. And then when you go to sell to a, CRO of a Fortune 500 company, now it's about kind of the same thing, just at a different scale. And you still build on top of the narrative of like, not only all the tools in one place, but now all the people in one place too, across your departments. You're able to move faster. You're able to XYZ, right? We all know the ROI story of it all. So I think I see it in layers. Maybe an onion would be a better metaphor. I'm not sure. I'll think on this more, but I see it in layers where it's all interconnective tissue, to the point that you were trying to make. But it's like where you start is going to be a different journey depending on who you're talking to, what experience level they have, what, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you kind of connect the points. You go on this, you've called it something before and I've lost it. Create your own journey. Is that what you've said before? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Create your own adventure. Yeah. Exactly. That's kind of like how I view all of that coming together.
Well said. I couldn't agree more there. 100% to your point, knowing who you're selling to, obviously presenting value to them in the language or in the use case they understand, and then moving up the value chain, hopefully, as you're going up to the organization. Yeah, well, I'm glad we got to have a chance about something that's near and dear to my heart and your heart, I know as well, but this company narrative. And like I said, I still do believe where a lot of companies do fall short is they don't put some deliberate time and investing and thinking about that, and then obviously aligning the company across that, and also the market. Like I said, I do think it's a competitive advantage in a time where features become more and more commoditized, knowledge becomes more and more commoditized, and people remember stories and narratives over facts. And so
they do.
Outfacting someone in this is probably not going to be the way that you win.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Hopefully it won't be this long again until we talk to you again, but until next time.
Bye.